small, homeless, hungry kitten burst into tears. But guess who came to the rescue? On a cold, rainy evening in the heart of the city, the streets were eerily quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. The air carried a biting chill, and the few pedestrians who braved the storm hurried along, umbrellas shielding them from the relentless downpour. Nestled in a damp alley, a tiny scruffy kitten sat trembling, its matted fur soaked through and its fragile body shivering uncontrollably. The kitten's green eyes, wide and glassy with fear, searched the darkness around it. It let out a faint, pitiful meow, its tiny voice barely audible above the rain. For days, the kitten had roamed the streets, scavenging for scraps and dodging looming shadows. Its mother had vanished weeks ago, likely caught by animal control or worse, and the kitten had been left to fend for itself. Hunger clawed at its belly, and the kitten, exhausted and hopeless, let out a long, mournful cry before curling into a tight ball against the cold brick wall. Just a few blocks away, a man named Thomas hurried home from work. His long day had ended with an argument with his boss, and the rain was only making his bad mood worse. Thomas had always considered himself a practical man, someone who kept his head down and focused on his own life. He had little time for distractions, least of all, stray animals. As he passed the alley, he heard the faintest sound, a desperate, high-pitched wail that pierced through the rhythmic patter of rain. He paused, his curiosity piqued. "Probably a rat or something," he muttered to himself. But as the cry came again, louder this time, Thomas found his feet moving toward the sound. There, huddled against the wall, was the kitten. It looked up at him with those enormous, pleading eyes, and for a moment, Thomas froze. The sight tugged at something deep within him, a long-forgotten memory of his childhood cat, Whiskers, who had been his only companion during his turbulent teenage years. "Hey, little one," he whispered, crouching down. The kitten recoiled at first, its tiny frame quivering with fear. Thomas reached out cautiously, his hand trembling slightly. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The kitten's instincts screamed to flee, but its legs were too weak to carry it. It meowed again, this time softer, almost as if it was pleading. Thomas took off his jacket and gently wrapped the kitten in it, shielding it from the rain. The kitten's small body relaxed slightly, sensing the warmth and kindness in his touch. Back at his small apartment, Thomas set up a makeshift bed for the kitten, with an old towel and a heating pad. He opened a can of tuna, the only thing he had that resembled cat food, and placed it in front of the kitten. At first, it eyed the food warily, but hunger soon overcame fear, and it devoured the meal with desperate gulps. Thomas watched, a strange warmth spreading through him. For the first time in years, his usually quiet home felt alive. He named the kitten Lucky, thinking how fortunate it was that he had decided to take that particular route home. Over the next few days, Thomas and Lucky settled into an unexpected routine. The kitten grew stronger, its playful side emerging as it began to trust its new environment. But there was something odd about Lucky. He seemed unusually alert, his eyes often darting to corners of the apartment where there was nothing but shadows. Thomas chalked it up to the kitten's heightened instincts, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Lucky was aware of something he wasn't. One night, as Thomas was preparing for bed, Lucky began meowing insistently, pacing by the front door. "What's wrong, buddy?" Thomas asked. But the kitten only grew more frantic, scratching at the door. Annoyed but concerned, Thomas opened it, expecting Lucky to simply want some air. Instead, the kitten bolted down the hallway, his tiny paws a blur. "Lucky, get back here!" Thomas shouted, grabbing his coat and chasing after him. The kitten led him out of the building and into the pouring rain. It darted down streets and alleys, its small frame moving with surprising speed and purpose. Thomas struggled to keep up, slipping on the wet pavement. Finally, Lucky stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse. He sat at the entrance, his tail flicking as he stared at Thomas expectantly. "What on earth are we doing here?" Thomas muttered, catching his breath. Lucky let out a loud meow and slipped through a broken window. Reluctantly, Thomas followed, using his phone's flashlight to navigate the dark interior. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rust. Then he heard it, a faint, muffled cry. His blood ran cold. It sounded human. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing. The cries grew louder, guiding him deeper into the building. In a corner, beneath a pile of debris, he found a young girl, no older than 6. She was pale and trembling, her hands tied behind her back. Her tear-streaked face lit up when she saw him. "Help me," she whispered. Thomas's hands shook as he freed her and picked her up. "It's okay. You're safe now," he murmured, though his heart was racing. He glanced at Lucky, who sat calmly nearby, his green eyes gleaming in the dim light. The police arrived soon after Thomas called them. The girl, whose name was Emily, had been kidnapped 2 days earlier, and her abductor had used the warehouse as a hideout. Authorities praised Thomas for his bravery, but he knew he couldn't have done it without Lucky. News of the rescue spread quickly, and Thomas and Lucky became local heroes. People marveled at how the kitten had led Thomas to the girl, calling it a miracle. But Thomas knew there was something special about Lucky, something beyond mere coincidence. In the weeks that followed, Lucky's bond with Thomas deepened. The once hardened man found himself smiling more, his days filled with laughter and warmth. He even started volunteering at an animal shelter, inspired by the kitten who had changed his life. One evening, as Thomas sat on the couch, with Lucky purring contentedly in his lap, he thought about how that rainy night had set everything in motion. He had saved Lucky, but in truth, Lucky had saved him, and Emily too. Life had a funny way of bringing the right souls together, he realized. And as he scratched Lucky's chin, Thomas whispered, "Thank you, little guy. You really are my lucky star." The days that followed Lucky's heroic act were surreal for Thomas. It wasn't every day that an ordinary man and his adopted kitten made headlines. Reporters camped outside his apartment, eager to capture every detail of the story, while neighbors who had barely acknowledged his presence before now stopped him to offer congratulations. But while the world seemed fixated on his newfound fame, Thomas remained focused on the quiet, extraordinary bond he was building with Lucky. Lucky had quickly adjusted to the changes in their lives, but Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the kitten's story than met the eye. Lucky seemed to possess an uncanny intelligence, reacting to situations with a perceptiveness that was far beyond ordinary. It wasn't just how Lucky had found Emily. There were other moments, subtle but profound, that hinted at something deeper. One morning, as Thomas prepared to leave for work, Lucky blocked the door, pawing at his leg and meowing insistently. Thomas hesitated, frowning. "What's the matter, bud? You know I can't take you with me." But Lucky refused to budge, his cries growing louder and more urgent. Annoyed but curious, Thomas finally decided to humor him. All right, let's see what's going on." The moment Thomas stepped out, he noticed smoke in the distance. It was faint, but unmistakable, curling up into the sky like a dark thread. Alarmed, he followed Lucky's lead, and within minutes, they arrived at a nearby apartment building engulfed in flames. The fire department hadn't arrived yet, and Thomas could hear the panicked cries of a woman trapped on the second floor. Without thinking, he called 911 and ran to the scene, urging the other residents to evacuate, while Lucky stayed by his side, meowing as if to guide the crowd to safety. By the time firefighters arrived, the woman had been rescued, and Thomas found himself hailed as a hero once again. As he cradled Lucky in his arms, he couldn't help but marvel at the kitten's inexplicable sense of danger. "You're something else, you know that?" he whispered. Lucky responded with a soft purr, as if to say, "You're welcome." The incident reignited Thomas's curiosity about Lucky's origins. He realized he knew next to nothing about where the kitten had come from. That evening, after putting out fresh food and water for Lucky, Thomas sat down with his laptop and began researching lost pet reports in the area. To his surprise, he found a listing from a month earlier that described a kitten matching Lucky's description. The owner, a woman named Evelyn, had posted tearful pleas online, offering a reward for anyone who found her missing pet. Thomas hesitated. Lucky had become such an integral part of his life that the thought of giving him up felt unbearable. But he also knew he couldn't ignore the possibility that someone out there was missing their beloved companion. The next day, he called the number on the listing. Evelyn answered, her voice trembling with hope as Thomas explained the situation. They arranged to meet at a local park, and as Thomas hung up, he glanced at Lucky, who was perched on the windowsill, gazing out at the city. "Well, buddy," Thomas said softly, "it looks like you might be going home." When Evelyn arrived at the park, she looked both relieved and apprehensive. She was a petite woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes that lit up the moment she saw Lucky. "That's him," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "That's my Cooper." Thomas's heart sank. Cooper. Lucky already had a name and a family. He handed the kitten over, his chest tightening as Evelyn hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." But as Evelyn cradled Lucky, something unexpected happened. The kitten squirmed in her arms, meowing loudly and clawing to get back to Thomas. Evelyn froze, her expression shifting from joy to confusion. "He doesn't seem to recognize me," she murmured, looking up at Thomas. "Are you sure this is Cooper?" Thomas explained how he'd found the kitten and their time together since then. Evelyn listened intently, her brows furrowing. "It sounds like he's bonded with you," she said finally, her voice tinged with sadness. Maybe he was meant to find you." The words hit Thomas like a wave. He reached out, and Lucky immediately leapt into his arms, purring loudly as if to say, "This is where I belong." Evelyn smiled through her tears. "You're lucky, you know," she said, echoing Thomas's own thoughts. "Cooper, or Lucky, as you call him, has always been special. He has a way of knowing when people need help." Before parting, Evelyn told Thomas about Cooper's past. The kitten had been born into a feral colony but had shown a remarkable knack for sensing danger, often alerting the caretakers to injured animals or predators nearby. "He's a little guardian angel," Evelyn said, her voice warm. "And it seems he's found the person he's meant to protect." Life with Lucky continued, but now Thomas viewed their bond with a deeper appreciation. He started volunteering at local shelters, inspired by Lucky's story, and even began fostering other animals in need. His once solitary existence transformed into one filled with purpose and connection. Lucky, for his part, continued to surprise Thomas with his instincts and courage. Whether it was alerting Thomas to a neighbor in need or comforting a scared foster puppy, Lucky proved time and again that he was no ordinary cat. One evening, as Thomas sat on the couch with Lucky curled up beside him, he thought about how much had changed since that rainy night in the alley. "You've turned my life upside down, little guy," he said, scratching Lucky's chin. The kitten purred contentedly, his eyes half closed. And in that quiet moment, Thomas realized that Lucky wasn't just a pet. He was a partner, a friend, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest creatures can have the biggest hearts. Thomas and Lucky's lives intertwined seamlessly as the months went by. The once lonely man and his remarkable feline companion became local legends, known for their uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time. Stories of Lucky's intuition spread throughout the community, and people began to view him as a symbol of hope and resilience. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Thomas walked to a nearby park, Lucky perched comfortably on his shoulder. It had become their routine to stroll through the park together, where Lucky basked in the attention of passers-by. Children ran up to pet him, and adults smiled warmly at the duo, often sharing their own stories about how the pair's kindness had inspired them. But that day, something unusual happened. As Thomas chatted with a group of elderly women on a park bench, Lucky leapt from his shoulder and darted toward a thicket of bushes near the playground. "Lucky!" Thomas called, his heart skipping a beat. The kitten never ran off without a reason. He followed quickly, brushing through the dense foliage, where he found Lucky pawing at the ground and meowing urgently. Thomas knelt beside him, his eyes widening, as he spotted a small, leather-bound book partially buried in the dirt. The book looked old, its cover cracked and weathered, as though it had been hidden for decades. Curiosity piqued, Thomas carefully retrieved the book and dusted it off. Lucky purred triumphantly, circling Thomas, as though he'd uncovered a treasure. Back at home, Thomas examined the book under better light. Its pages were yellowed, filled with faded handwriting in a looping, elegant script. It appeared to be a journal, and as Thomas began to read, he realized it contained the musings of a young woman who had lived during the late 1800s. The entries detailed her life in the very neighborhood Thomas now called home. She wrote of her dreams, her struggles, and her unyielding love for animals, especially cats. One entry, dated May 3, 1897, sent chills down Thomas's spine. "There is a certain magic in the bond we share with our feline friends. They are not just companions, they are protectors, bearers of secrets, and, sometimes, messengers of fate. I believe the soul of my dear cat, Ambrose, will linger long after I am gone, guiding those who are kind enough to listen." Thomas looked down at Lucky, who sat watching him intently, as though he understood every word. Could it be? The idea seemed far-fetched, but there was no denying the strange connection between the journal's words and Lucky's extraordinary nature. The journal also contained a map of the neighborhood as it had existed more than a century ago. Intrigued, Thomas decided to follow the map's markings, which led to an overgrown lot at the edge of the park. Armed with a small shovel, he began to dig, and Lucky stayed close, meowing excitedly. Within minutes, Thomas uncovered a small rusted tin box. Inside was a collection of trinkets: an old locket, a silver hairpin, and a small figurine of a cat that bore an uncanny resemblance to Lucky. Thomas's breath caught. Was this merely a coincidence? Or was Lucky somehow connected to this forgotten piece of history? He couldn't be sure, but he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the mystery that had brought Lucky into his life. The discovery of the journal and the tin box marked a turning point. Thomas began writing about his experiences with Lucky, sharing their adventures and the lessons he'd learned about compassion, intuition, and the profound connections between humans and animals. His stories resonated with readers worldwide, and soon he was approached by a publisher to compile them into a book. The book, titled Lucky's Legacy, became a bestseller, with proceeds donated to animal shelters and rescue organizations. Thomas and Lucky traveled to book signings and charity events, spreading their message of hope and kindness. At one event, a woman approached Thomas with tears in her eyes. "Your story saved my life," she said. "I was going through a dark time, and reading about Lucky gave me the strength to keep going." Thomas was deeply moved. He knelt down to let Lucky meet the woman, and the kitten nuzzled her hand, as though he understood the impact he'd made. Years later, as Thomas sat on the porch of his cozy home, watching the sun set with Lucky by his side, he reflected on how much his life had changed. What had begun as a chance encounter in a rainy alley had blossomed into a journey of love, discovery, and purpose. Lucky, now a full-grown cat with a soft silver-gray coat, stretched lazily and rested his head on Thomas's lap. Though many adventures lay behind them, Thomas knew their story was far from over. "Thank you, Lucky," Thomas whispered, stroking his companion's fur, "for everything." And as the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Thomas felt a quiet certainty. He and Lucky had found each other for a reason. Together, they had not only changed their own lives but had touched the hearts of countless others, a legacy that would shine brightly for years to come. The years that followed cemented Thomas and Lucky as symbols of hope and transformation in their community and beyond. Lucky, the once starving kitten found in a rain-soaked alley, became an emblem of resilience. And Thomas, the man who had once felt adrift, found his life irrevocably enriched by their bond. By the time Thomas's book, Lucky's Legacy, had gone global, their story had inspired thousands to adopt rescue animals and support shelters. Letters poured in from readers worldwide, each one a testament to the power of compassion. There were tales of people who had adopted neglected pets, individuals who had found solace in their bond with animals, and families who had healed fractured relationships by learning to care for something fragile and pure. But what truly astounded Thomas was the ripple effect Lucky had on their town. Their local shelter, once overcrowded and underfunded, now thrived thanks to the donations and volunteers inspired by Lucky's story. The shelter even created a special program, Lucky's Paw Project, which paired rescue animals with children in foster care, emphasizing how mutual love and care could heal both human and animal hearts. Lucky's innate ability to sense and comfort those in need remained as strong as ever. During one particularly snowy winter, the duo made an impromptu stop at the local hospital. Lucky, perched on Thomas's shoulder, meowed insistently until Thomas followed his lead to the pediatric ward. There, they met a young girl named Emily, who had been struggling with a severe illness. Her parents were at their wits' end, and Emily hadn't smiled in weeks. But the moment Lucky leapt onto her bed and nuzzled her cheek, her laughter filled the room, bringing tears to everyone's eyes. Emily's recovery became a celebrated miracle at the hospital, and her parents credited Lucky with rekindling her will to fight. Stories like this became common in Thomas and Lucky's life, each one reinforcing the profound bond they shared and the incredible ripple effects it created. In their later years, Thomas and Lucky enjoyed a quieter pace, though their home remained a hub for the community. Thomas converted part of his backyard into a small sanctuary for stray animals, ensuring that no creature would ever have to endure what Lucky had faced. Lucky, now a dignified elder cat with a silver-gray coat flecked with white, served as a gentle mentor to the younger rescues, his calming presence guiding nervous new arrivals to trust humans again. One crisp autumn evening, Thomas sat on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, with Lucky curled up on his lap. The air was cool, and the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. As the stars began to dot the horizon, Thomas reflected on their extraordinary journey. "Do you realize what we've done, Lucky?" he murmured softly, his hand gently stroking the cat's fur. Lucky purred in response, his eyes half closed, but filled with that familiar, knowing expression. Thomas thought back to the night they met. The rain, the alley, the fragile kitten trembling in the shadows. That single act of kindness, that choice to reach out instead of walking away, had not only saved a life, but had ignited a chain of events that changed countless others. In that moment, Thomas realized something profound. Lucky wasn't just a cat. He was a catalyst for change, a living embodiment of hope, and a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward in unimaginable ways. The old man and his loyal companion sat in peaceful silence, content in their shared understanding. Lucky eventually lifted his head and gazed up at the stars, his ears twitching as if listening to something only he could hear. Thomas followed his gaze, smiling softly. "Whatever comes next, Lucky, I know it'll be just as extraordinary," Thomas whispered. And, as the first fireflies of the evening danced through the twilight, Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He wasn't just a man who had saved a cat. He was a man who had been saved by one. Together, they had built a legacy of love, compassion, and second chances. A legacy that would shine on, long after the stars disappeared from the night sky. Thanks for watching.